Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date and help the channel grow. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today. And now, on with the show. You are listening to the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion with the one and only Gray. Greetings, opinion nerds. It is I, the one they call Gray, and today we're going big before going home, talking about Zack Snyder's Justice League in IMAX in the gray area coming up right now. Sorry, fellas, but in some cases, size really does matter. Much of the movie-going world seems to be split on the value of traveling to the local, or in some cases not so local, multiplex to watch films when, in theory, excellent home theater gear is available that in some cases can rival those scaled-up setups. While that's arguable for many reasons, and as a home theater enthusiast I can and have gone on at length, one large screen area everyone seems to agree on is that IMAX viewing is entirely something else. Now, there are a couple kinds of IMAXs out there that can confuse the conversation, so let's fan the flames of differentiation while clearing the air of all the smoke. There are three primary types of IMAX in commercial use. The most common is IMAX 2K Digital, which is a large format, dual 2K laser projected presentation. These screens are much larger than average theater screens, with an aspect ratio of 189:1, proportionally the full height and width of your standard 16:9 television. The next less common format is the giant screen digital IMAX, another dual 2K laser projected format with screens in the 4:3 aspect ratio, which is roughly 20% taller than the previous type at the same width. While they can easily show the same presentations as the previous type, their advantage is they can also accommodate the full-size presentations captured on either the IMAX 70mm film format or a digital equivalent. This format's older brother is an analog film presentation which uses the very large 70mm film prints on analog projectors. The last of the primary formats is the IMAX Dome Theater, which uses the same 70mm film prints but projects them on a large curved surface designed to overwhelm your field of view for maximum immersion. The dual 2K laser system increases image brightness over traditional IMAX by projecting two overlapping versions of the same image using RGB laser arrays to shoot the image directly onto the screen. And while it is brighter than the analog version, the maximum resolution of the images is limited to 2.9K versus the film format's analog equivalent of about 16K. While it does use a variation of HDR, or high dynamic range, it's an IMAX proprietary type that differs from the consumer version and produces a different color palette. IMAX theaters also use their own proprietary 12-channel digital sound system that differs from Dolby Atmos' possible 128 channels. Okay, I'm sure this is all riveting stuff, but at this point you're all wondering what is the point and will we ever get there? Well, this past weekend, the last week of April 2023, director Zack Snyder and his incredible production partner and beautiful wife, Deborah, hosted a charity event benefiting the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention to screen his director's cut of the DC Comics hero team-up film Justice League, appropriately retitled Zack Snyder's Justice League, to an audience of fans and donors who came from all over the world to meet, greet, commiserate, and enjoy the film at the IMAX Auditorium at Universal City in Los Angeles, California. As well documented, while the film's initial production image was framed for 185 release, basic widescreen, director Snyder and cinematographer Fabian Wagner captured the image on 4perf Super 35mm film. Basically, they shot a very sharp, big-ass square frame with the idea that the film could be blown up and projected on a big-ass square IMAX screen. Not to reopen old wounds, but Snyder's version of the film wasn't released as planned back in 2017, and the possibility of this large format screening seemed lost, as did any chance to see his version of the film at all. But a huge push from fans and a new streaming service hungry for original content later, and the film was incredibly released both on the now defunct HBO Max service and both 4K and standard Blu-ray. An IMAX version of the film was prepped, and that brings us up to date, watching films for fun and charity, seated with a little over 300 Snyder Spartans, captivated by an image that, for years, none of them thought they'd ever see at all, let alone 10 times larger than life amongst friends and peers. So why the IMAX 101? Well, the proper technical background is important to understand why, in the opinion of your humble narrator, this presentation was kind of a mixed bag. If you've previously streamed the film in its native, albeit heavily compressed 4K format, or have the film on 4K Blu-ray with a decent HDR screen, you have, from a technical perspective, already seen a superior presentation of the film. Given the limitations of the format, the IMAX presentation is, on the whole, far less sharp, less bright relative to the space, and less vivid than either of the 4K presentations, most especially the Blu-ray. There's just no other way to say it. The home versions of the film are just better looking. While we easily consider the 1:4:3 format to be square, unlike my dad, it isn't perfectly square. It also isn't as square as a Super 35mm film frame, which has an aspect ratio of 1:33, the entirety of which was finished all the way down to the VFX and transferred to the disc. Given the fan demand to see director Snyder's vision of the film realized, the director and his team chose to release this full-frame image in an attempt to give the fans the whole enchilada with beans and rice. Since the whole point of this IMAX presentation was to give the film the big, very fucking big screen treatment side to side and top to bottom, some of the image had to be sacrificed. Not much, but enough to be noticeable for cyborg-eyed fans. On top of that, a couple of scenes were blown up to remove some instances of assumed artificial artifacts added to the side of the frames, and a few scenes emulating what happens when light enters the camera around the gate for one reason or another and overexposes the negative. Blowing the image up diminished the quality of those moments in a noticeable way. If the 4K Blu-ray represents the version of the film that's closest to the digital master, the copy of the film from which all other versions are derived, then it's hard to look at this presentation, again, strictly from a technical perspective, as anything less than a step down in quality. On a minor but still noticeable note, since the film has already been available in the full-frame presentation, the kind of surprise one might derive from seeing the radical expansion of the image from one of the typical widescreen formats, either 185 or 239, is also diminished. We already know what the movie looks like as a big square image. It's one of the things its fans love about it. We could talk about the sound in the theater, but that's really just a conversation about the difference between home theater and auditorium theater, and its impact, while important, is less substantial for those with any kind of surround sound system. By all technical metrics, seeing this film in IMAX is a lesser experience than seeing it at home. So why is seeing it in this format such a big deal? Well, it's being a big deal that makes it a big deal, because there's one thing you get from this presentation that you cannot and will not ever be able to get at home, no matter how good your setup is, and that's the stimulating sorcery of scale. One of the key differences between an auditorium and home viewing experience is the impact the scale of the presentation has. Details in the image are more apparent, be they in the set dressing and wardrobe, or more importantly, the minute movements of a performer. Small facial expressions, or a twitch of the eye, the tensing of a muscle, or the throb of a vein, all these small elements that inform the emotion in the storytelling are amplified. Now take that and increase by the scale of an IMAX screen, where a close-up is 3 stories tall and an extreme close-up is like being eye to eye with Mount Rushmore. And while you could try and replicate this experience by getting closer to your screen of choice, this doesn't quite work. Not only can your mind tell the difference between something that's big and something that's close, proximity to the screen puts more strain on the muscles around your eyes, and it can be fatiguing very quickly. It's really not the same. But the real magic of IMAX is in its immersive impact. Seated properly, an IMAX screen can take up almost 80% of your field of vision. You combine that with a dark room and a completely enveloping sound field, and you have an almost totally immersive experience. This really comes to the fore when you have scenes where the camera travels across a distance, like the fly-in to Themyscira during this film's prologue. The feeling of movement is pronounced, like being on a roller coaster. It changes aspects of the experience from being observational to being participatory. You aren't just looking through the camera's eye, you are the camera's eye. This experience was a major factor in the creation of the IMAX format back in the 1970s, and while it isn't necessarily as contributory to all of the film's storytelling, when it works, it brings you into the presence of the film in a way you simply can't get anywhere else. All of this creates an experience that's almost overwhelming. It's sheer size washing over you like a wave. It allows you to get totally lost in the film, to tune out everything else in the world and simply live within the film's presentation. Even some of the more simple scenes, you are pulled around by the movement of the camera. Simple trucks, dollies, and pans pull you into the storytelling, turning what is relatively simple film language into a physical sensation. The circular pan around the 5 characters as they come to the understanding that they have a chance to bring back the world's greatest hero becomes a dizzying affair, emphasizing the whirlwind of realization. While you can get a measure of the effect in any standard theatrical exhibition, it's all emphasized and overpowering in IMAX, and that physical effect leads to a corresponding sympathetic emotional reaction. At the risk of sounding any more like an unpaid advertisement, IMAX makes movies more impactful on just about every level. Yes, it's true. Size often does matter. But as much praise as I can heap on the presentation despite its relative technical drawbacks, screen size and number of audio channels is not what made this particular screening a once-in-a-lifetime experience. What made this experience truly special was the people. Beyond the presence of Zack and Deborah Snyder, or film stars Ray Porter, Ray Fisher, and Ben Affleck, or screenwriter Chris Terrio, visual effects supervisor DJ Desjardins, or editor Dodie Dorn, who picked up the torch from the late David Brenner, or Zack's incredible sister Audrey Davis, his man-at-arms Wesley Collier, and all the volunteers from the Pasadena chapter of AFSP, it was the presence of so many enthusiastic people from all walks and all corners that truly made this event one of a kind. Online handles and avatars that your humble narrator had been sharing ideas and complaints with for some time were suddenly actualized into real people who could smile at you, share a laugh, shake hands, and grapple with big, broad hugs. There was no real barrier between the pros and all us con mods, and for an afternoon we all sat together in that theater looking at the same big screen and sharing the same big experience, whether it was for the 1st, 5th, or 50th time. For 4 hours we were all joined by our love for a movie, and through that, maybe in some small way, for a few hours we all shared in a love of each other. There really is no more an immersive experience on a bigger screen than the one that plays out across a group of people all united in a single moment in time. And no matter how sharp the resolution or how bright the colors, no matter how many channels of sound or what aspect ratio you put it in, no movie can ever compare with that experience.